Sergeant Wilfred Harris crouched inside his Sherman Firefly at the eastern edge of Lingèvres, Normandy, at 2:27 on the afternoon of June 14, 1944, watching 5 German Panther tanks advance across open fields 800 meters out. 31 years old. 8 days in Normandy. 0 tank kills to his name, and a command he'd inherited only 4 days earlier, when a Panther round killed his previous commander outright, near Tilly-sur-Seulles, the smoke barely clearing before Harris found himself in charge. In the next 6 minutes, he and his gunner were going to do something that would end up studied in British tank schools for decades. The British 7th Armoured Division had already lost 42 Sherman tanks in 6 days of fighting, and the mathematics explained exactly why the Germans kept attacking with such confidence. A standard Sherman 75mm gun couldn't punch through a Panther's frontal armor past 300 meters. The Panther's own 75mm gun, mounted in a longer, more powerful configuration, could kill a Sherman well beyond 1,000. The Germans knew the numbers as well as the British did, which is exactly why panzer crews had started attacking head-on rather than maneuvering for advantage. They didn't need the advantage. The gun did the work for them. Harris commanded the one tank in his squadron, built to change that equation entirely. A Sherman Firefly. Britain's powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun welded into an American Sherman turret never designed to hold it. The Ministry of Supply had rejected the concept as physically impossible not once but 3 separate times before the war, insisting the gun was too large and the turret too small, that Britain's own Challenger and Cromwell tank programs would solve the problem instead. Major George Bridie at the Lulworth Armored Fighting School ignored the ruling entirely and welded a 17-pounder into a Sherman turret anyway. No working recoil system at first, the entire tank forced to absorb the shock of every shot fired. It worked, badly, and the ministry ordered him to stop. Lieutenant Colonel George Witheridge joined the unauthorized project that June, a man who understood exactly what an inferior gun cost in lives, after watching his own tank get knocked out by superior German armor in North Africa. Together, he and Bridie solved the recoil problem, redesigned the breech, cut a new gunner's hatch, moved the radio to an external box welded onto the turret's rear, and stripped out the entire hull machine gunner position just to make room for the 17-pounder's oversized ammunition. The ministry found out and ordered them to stop a second time. Witheridge went over their heads instead, using personal connections at the Ministry of Supply to argue that Britain's official tank programs were failing outright. The Challenger's own development was stalling. The Cromwell's turret ring proved physically too narrow to ever hold the gun at all. The Firefly, he argued, was Britain's only realistic option before the invasion of France arrived. Approval finally came, in November 1943, 7 months before D-Day, with barely enough time to convert a few hundred Shermans before the invasion fleet sailed. 1 Firefly, issued per 4 tank troop, critically short of what would actually be needed against the armor waiting in Normandy. German panzer crews identified the Firefly's distinctively longer 17-pounder barrel within 3 days of the landings, and standing orders went out across their units almost immediately. Kill the Fireflies first, always, before engaging any standard Sherman nearby. British crews responded by smearing mud and mesh over their own barrels, trying to disguise the silhouette. It rarely worked well enough to matter. If you want to see how one tank gunner faced down 5 German Panthers with 5 rounds, hit that like button. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Harris. Trooper McKillop sat to Harris's left that afternoon, 24 years old, Scottish, a gunner who'd fired exactly 7 rounds in combat before this day, and never once at an enemy tank. 3 misses and 4 hits against German half-tracks. Useful practice, but nothing close to what a moving Panther at range would demand. The 17-pounder itself remained a brutal weapon to operate, even after Bridie and Witheridge's fixes. Firing it produced a muzzle flash, bright enough to ignite dry hedgerows outright, instantly marking the Firefly's position to anyone watching, and forced both gunner and commander to blink through momentary blindness after every shot. Each 17-pounder round weighed 38 pounds, nearly double a standard Sherman shell, muscled into the breech by a loader, working alone in a cramped hull that no longer had room for a hull gunner at all. Harris positioned the Firefly hull down behind a stone wall at the village's edge, only the long barrel and turret exposed, and watched the Panthers close. 800 meters, 700, the range steadily narrowing toward the point where the German guns would become just as lethal as his own. At 600 meters, the lead Panthers commander dropped into his hatch and buttoned up. Combat ready, hunting, clearly aware British armor was somewhere nearby. McKillop centered his sight on the weakest point of the Panther's frontal profile, where the glacis plate met the turret ring, and waited. McKillop fired at 2:30. The recoil slammed the entire tank backward 6 inches, despite every improvement Brighty and Witheridge had made to the mounting. The muzzle flash blinding both men for a full 2 seconds, and igniting the hedge directly in front of the Firefly on contact. When the smoke cleared, the lead Panther had rolled forward another few meters and stopped dead. The round had punched clean through exactly where McKillop aimed, and smoke leaking from the hatches meant the crew inside never had the chance to react at all. The remaining 4 Panthers scattered instantly rather than pressing forward as a group. Professional crews, not green replacements, reacting the way trained tankers were supposed to react to a sudden loss. 2 peeled right, 1 reversed hard, and the smoke from that burning hedge had already given away exactly where the shot had come from. Harris had perhaps 15 seconds before return fire started finding his position. McKillop tracked the 3rd Panther as it tried to angle its armor away from him, led the moving target, and fired a second time. The round caught the tank's side suspension, penetrated cleanly, and detonated the ammunition stored inside. The turret lifted 8 feet into the air, flipped, and crashed down inverted as flames poured from the hull. 2 Panthers destroyed in under 40 seconds. The 3 remaining tanks opened fire simultaneously, 3 75mm rounds screaming toward the stone wall, 1 exploding harmlessly 20 feet wide, 1 striking the wall directly and showering the Firefly in stone fragments, the 3rd passing close enough overhead that Harris heard it whistle past the turret. The Germans were ranging and fast. Harris ordered his driver to reverse 20 feet to fresh cover behind a barn, while McKillop reloaded, the loader forcing another 38-pound shell into the breech by main strength as McKillop scanned for the next target. 1 Panther had circled left, trying to flank the village from the northwest, while the remaining 2 pressed from the east. Standard German doctrine, splitting the defender's attention across 2 directions at once. McKillop chose the flanking tank, tracked its faster movement, led it by 3 tank lengths, and fired. The round struck low, penetrating the lower glacis and wrecking the transmission outright. The Panther lurched to a stop, and its crew bailed immediately, running for the tree line rather than risk staying inside a disabled vehicle. 3 Panthers down, 2 still mobile, and both now firing directly at the barn Harris was using for cover, wood exploding, the structure partially collapsing, the Firefly suddenly without any real concealment left at all. The 4th Panther closed to 400 meters and traversed its own gun directly toward the exposed Firefly. McKillop had perhaps 3 seconds before that Panther fired back at essentially point-blank range. He fired first. The round crossed the distance and struck the gun mantlet itself, the single thickest piece of armor on the entire tank, and punched through anyway, traveling through the gun breech and into the turret, before the ammunition cooked off in one continuous, instantaneous explosion. The turret separated from the hull entirely and landed 30 feet away. 4 Panthers destroyed or disabled in under 2 minutes, and 1 remained. That last commander understood the arithmetic immediately. 4 tanks lost in barely 2 minutes meant continuing the attack was suicide, and he began reversing toward the tree line to break contact. Harris had every reasonable justification to let him go. Mission accomplished, the village secured, British infantry able to hold, but he also understood what a single escaped Panther meant. By nightfall, every panzer commander within 10 miles would know a Firefly was operating near Lingèvres, and they would come back hunting with more tanks, better coordination, and infantry support specifically trained to counter exactly this weapon. The 5th Panther didn't simply retreat, though. At the tree line it stopped, turned to present its side armor, and began moving parallel to the trees rather than continuing to withdraw, repositioning rather than running, its commander setting up for a long-range duel rather than conceding the field entirely. At 600 meters, the German gun was still accurate enough to kill, And now the Panther knew precisely where the Firefly's compromised position sat. The collapsed barn, the burning hedge, the shattered stone wall, every landmark already given away by the fight itself. The Panther went hull down behind a low rise, only its turret visible, and waited for Harris to move and expose himself first. Harris moved his own tank 15 feet to change the angle, and both commanders understood in the same instant that the next shot fired would decide everything. The Panther fired first, the round screaming past the Firefly's left side and missing by roughly 3 feet, close enough that Harris felt the pressure wave, the German gunner having correctly anticipated the direction Harris would move, but not quite the timing. McKillop didn't wait for a clean recoil cycle. He fired while the Panther's own gun was still settling back into position, and the round struck the turret face dead center, penetrating and silencing the tank instantly, smoke pouring from the commander's hatch. At 2:33, 6 minutes after the engagement began, 5 German Panthers lay destroyed or disabled around Lingèvres, 0 British tanks lost. 3 standard Shermans that had taken position behind the village buildings never fired a single round during the entire engagement. Their guns simply couldn't reach that far or penetrate that armor, and their crews had spent 6 minutes watching the fight from cover, with nothing to contribute but a clear view of what a Firefly, properly employed, could actually do. Harris radioed squadron headquarters afterward, with a report almost comically understated, given what had just happened. 5 Panthers destroyed near Lingèvres. Request reconnaissance of the eastern approaches to confirm no additional armor remained in the area. British intelligence officers reached the village within hours, measuring penetration holes, documenting damage patterns, interviewing Harris and McKillop in detail. The report reached armored headquarters by evening and was circulating through every British regiment in Normandy by the following morning. The examination revealed something that made the victory land even harder. All 5 destroyed Panthers belonged to Panzer Lehr, one of Germany's most experienced armored divisions. Veteran crews transferred in from the Eastern Front rather than green replacements. A weapon rejected 3 times on paper had just destroyed 5 of Germany's best tanks, crewed by some of Germany's best tankers, using 5 rounds in 6 minutes. The same engagement that proved the Firefly's value also exposed exactly what made it dangerous to operate. That brilliant muzzle flash had given away Harris's position instantly, every single time he fired, forcing him to relocate after nearly every shot. The gun's extra length made maneuvering difficult in tight village terrain. The missing hull gunner position meant less flexibility if infantry closed in. Loading 38-pound shells exhausted a loader far faster than standard Sherman ammunition ever did. The Firefly was, by every measure in that report, a specialist weapon, lethal when used exactly right, and genuinely vulnerable the moment it wasn't. One detail from Harris's after-action report became something close to legend among British tank crews afterward. He never shouted a single fire command during the entire engagement. He spoke to McKillop quietly the whole time, steady instructions, calm corrections, treating every expensive 17-pounder round as something too precious to waste on anything less than a clean shot. McKillop delivered exactly that: 5 shots, 5 hits, 0 rounds wasted. Lingèvres wasn't an isolated case either. Days earlier near Normandy, a different Firefly crew had knocked out a similar string of attacking Panthers from the 12th SS Panzer Division in rapid succession during a single defensive action. And near Tilly-sur-Seulles, a Canadian-crewed Firefly separately destroyed 2 Tiger tanks in the same general stretch of fighting. The pattern held across the entire Normandy campaign. When a Firefly crew had time, cover, and a patient gunner, German heavy armor died at a rate no standard Sherman could match. By midsummer, Firefly production had become the Ministry of Supply's highest priority. The same office that had rejected the weapon 3 times before the war, now racing to convert as many Shermans as possible. British armored regiments that had entered Normandy with a single Firefly per 4-tank troop were receiving 2 per troop by late August. Intelligence analysis covering June through August credited Fireflies with roughly 64% of all German heavy tank kills achieved by British forces during that stretch. Panthers and Tigers destroyed at nearly 3 times the rate standard Shermans managed. despite Fireflies making up only a small fraction of total British tank strength in the field. The crew didn't stop at Lingèvres. Between June 14th and late August 1944, Harris and McKillop's Firefly destroyed 9 more German armored vehicles across the fighting that followed, a mix of Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Stu-G assault guns. 14 total confirmed kills across roughly 10 weeks of continuous operations. Their tank took 11 separate hits over that stretch: machine gun fire, Panzerfaust rockets, one 75mm round that struck the turret at an angle steep enough to ricochet off rather than penetrate. And the crew walked away from every single one, repaired the tank, and went straight back into the fight. McKillop's overall accuracy across that period held at roughly 66% under genuine combat conditions against moving targets, at ranges between 200 and 700 meters, a rate his own regiment considered exceptional given the 17-pounder's brutal handling characteristics. Both men were formally recognized that summer. Harris received the Military Cross, McKillop the Military Medal, both citations specifically referencing the action at Lingèvres and the discipline behind it. Most Firefly crews weren't nearly as fortunate across that same stretch of fighting. British losses among Fireflies specifically ran close to 43% of all those deployed by the start of August, German tactics having adapted quickly enough to specifically target the weapon that had just proven so devastating against Panzer Lehr. Harris and McKillop's own luck finally ran out that September, during Operation Market Garden near Nijmegen, when a German 88mm anti-tank gun scored a direct hit on their engine compartment. The tank burned. Both men escaped without serious injury and were back in a replacement Firefly within 3 days, continuing to fight through the rest of the campaign in the Low Countries until Germany's surrender the following May. Harris went home to Yorkshire after the war and spent the next 4 decades working as a garage mechanic, rarely discussing what had happened at Lingèvres unless directly asked. McKillop returned to Scotland and became a mathematics teacher, eventually settling into a quiet career at a secondary school in Edinburgh. Neither man wrote a memoir. Neither sought attention beyond the medals awarded to them in 1944. Harris died in 1987 at 74. McKillop died in 1993 at 73. Roughly 2,100 Fireflies were converted and deployed across the entire war, serving with British, Canadian, Polish, and Free French armored units from Normandy through the final push into Germany. Together, they're credited with destroying an estimated 900 German tanks and assault guns, more heavy German armor than any other single Allied vehicle type managed in the entire European theater. The 17-pounder gun's basic design went on to influence British anti-tank development for decades afterward, eventually equipping the post-war Centurion tank in an improved form. The Firefly itself was retired from British service by 1946. Most of the surviving hulls eventually scrapped for steel, with only a small handful preserved today at tank museums in Britain and France. The engagement at Lingèvres became a standing case study in British tank schools for exactly the reasons that made it remarkable in the moment. 5 shots, 5 hits, perfect fire discipline under pressure, a weapon 3 separate ministry rulings had tried to kill before the war, proved decisive within 6 minutes against Germany's best armored division. Sometimes the solution nobody wants turns out to be the only one that actually works. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Everyone tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing stories like this one out of the archive every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if anyone in your family served, we want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making sure Wilfred Harris and Trooper McKillop don't disappear into silence.